With the total solar eclipse just about 2 months away, you and your family may be making plans for viewing the beautiful spectacle of totality. But have you thought about how the eclipse may impact your pets or even wild animals? Well, that's what we're going to break down this week. And I have a more in-depth explanation on the impacts of total solar eclipses on wild animals. You can check that one out on YouTube and also WTOL.com/solar-eclipse. That is going to be your hub for information as the April 8th total solar eclipse approaches. Hard to believe it's just 2 months away. And in this week's topic, we're going to talk about the impacts to your furry friends, whether you have a cat, dog, or you're just interested in spectating wild animals. We've got something for you. So let's break down the graphics and get into the information, starting things off with dogs and cats and how they may be affected not so equally by the total solar eclipse. In general, dogs are going to be more impacted by totality than our cats, and that may be no surprise to those of you that have one of each or a combination of pets. In general, dogs are more impacted not just by the sun itself, but by the social situations that can arise with eclipse viewing, especially in public. Starting things off with the obvious, eye damage can result from directly staring into the sun, and the same issues that humans have with prolonged exposure can also occur in pets. There can be retinal damage to the eye by staring at the sun, especially for a prolonged period of time, and thankfully animals have natural instincts to avoid staring at the sun, or at the very least to squint and look away from it. So even though that's not a big concern, eclipse glasses are recommended for viewing in pets, and of course sunglasses will not cut it. You need eclipse glasses that are ISO approved and meet international guidelines and standards, and we have more information on where to find those glasses at WTOL.com/solar-eclipse for more information not only on your glasses but also glasses your pets may need in public. Now, the changeover to total darkness itself won't necessarily trigger your pet to look at the sky, although they may still be a little bit confused, especially if your dog or cat has a routine that is associated with darkness and associated with nighttime. Now, if you are concerned about the potential impacts to your pet, staying indoors and staying home is likely the safest bet, but there is a sure thing that many folks will decide to take their furry friends, especially those dogs, out in public places. Now, pets do have instincts that tell them not to stare directly at the sun. You may notice when your cat is sitting in a sunspot by the window, tends to squint a little bit, and that's a natural reaction to avoid the adverse impacts of staring at the direct sun. So let's start things off by talking about the impacts to dogs and what you can expect from the total solar eclipse. Now, in general, dogs are more highly affected, and that is largely due to the social impacts, as many folks will be taking their dogs out to public parks, viewing parties, and just public places in general during the eclipse. As I mentioned before, buy eclipse glasses for pets, and those need to have the specifications that are the same for human glasses. Sunglasses, not going to cut it. They need to have that international ISO approval, and staring at the sun can cause eye damage, so make sure that if your pets do have that tendency, keep them home and keep them away from the risks of the total eclipse. Now, public parks in particular will have a lot of other dogs out and about, and in a bit I'm going to get down to some of the data showing just how many tourists are going to be flocking into Northwest Ohio. We can actually look back on the 2017 Great American Eclipse and some of the states and just how many tourists they saw, and many of those tourists brought their furry friends to view as well. Now, the eclipse can be harmful to the eyes of your pets, so I talked about the importance of that. And if your dog does have social anxiety, if there are behaviors that are not necessarily the best when out in public, for instance, aggressive or violent behavior, or if your dog just gets a little bit paranoid and tends to use the restroom when it's nervous or paranoid in public, I'd recommend staying home, because all public places are going to be swamped on this day on April 8th. Not only public parks, but really all public areas are going to have a significantly greater amount of traffic, and also consider just how busy the roads will be. If you did decide to take your dog out in the car, there's going to be a much greater period of time that your dog's going to be cooped up, and that can increase anxiety. So let's look back on some 2017 data and just the sheer number of tourists that we saw. Now, the tourists are also going to have a significant impact on our economy, and that's another story that you'll find on WTOL.com/solar-eclipse, also on our streaming platforms and online, and I break down the economic impact to local businesses this will have. But for this purpose, we're talking more about how busy public areas will be. In 2017 in Wyoming, that was one state that got to enjoy totality during that eclipse. There were 75% of the tourists coming from out of state. In other words, people are traveling from afar to see this astronomical spectacle. That is likely to hold true for the Buckeye State as well. In South Carolina, which is also another state that was in the path of totality, 1.6 million people came to visit, and 800,000 of those came from out of state. Now, it's worth noting that the 2017 path of totality, that was perpendicular to 2024. In 2017, it stretched from the Pacific Northwest to the southeast. This time around stretches from Texas and Mexico all the way up towards Maine. So really the opposite path, but states all the way from Wyoming to South Carolina, at least last time around, did see a significant proportion of out-of-state tourists. Many of those did decide to bring their dogs. The state of Nebraska was also a state that saw a significant influx of tourist activity, and the 2017 total solar eclipse was the biggest tourist event in Nebraska history. 708,000 people came to Nebraska to view totality, and a sizable proportion of those did decide to come from out of state. In fact, the data shows that 87% came from out of state. So what you can expect on April 8th, it's going to be far different than a normal walk in the park with your dog. These areas are going to be considerably more congested and busy. If your dog doesn't deal well with crowds, consider these numbers from 2017 and just how many folks will be coming in to Northwest Ohio. And that not only includes the city of Toledo, but also small towns in the path of totality. We have a list of those towns, many of which are in the vicinity of Seneca County. Even if you live in a relatively rural area, there will be people visiting your neck of the woods to view that spectacle of totality. Now, the impacts to cats generally going to be much less significant, especially for those indoor cats. The eclipse itself not likely to cause any impacts, but if there are changes to your pet's routine, that social factor may provide more of an impact than the actual change in daylight. Now, if you do decide to take your pet out in public, keep in mind that change to routine can cause impacts. Now, some good suggestions include providing distractions, providing comfort, and even some treats during totality can help ease that anxiety. Cats naturally have an aversion to direct sunlight, and as I mentioned, they often squint, and that is a natural instinct to avoid the effects of that direct exposure to UV light. So that's not something you have to worry about, although if you do decide to take your dog out in public places, those eclipse glasses certainly worth considering, and with just 2 months to go, now is the time to pick up those eclipse glasses. Treats and toys can help alleviate that anxiety and can help provide distraction. So if you do decide to take your furry friend out in a public park or a public place, bring some treats and toys along just in case they do get a little bit nervous, anxious, or stressed out with all of the people around who are spectating and viewing the eclipse. And pets with anxiety disorders, pets who have a tendency to become a little bit worried when around others and out in public, they may be better off staying at home where it is a little bit less busy, less crowded, and more familiar. In general, indoor pets are going to be less affected than outdoor pets. The sun and darkness may throw them for a loop, at least as far as their routine goes, but in general, most indoor pets are going to be largely unaffected. Now, wild animals are way more significantly impacted than domestic pets, and there's actually been a good deal of research on the effects of solar eclipses on wild animals, and that research has been documented over the years. And as I mentioned, I have a YouTube video up that's also on WTOL 11 Plus that talks more in depth, but I'll briefly get into the impacts on wild animals and also zoo animals, some very interesting research. The absence of sunshine can cause erratic behaviors in zoo animals, and there was actually one South Carolina zoo during the 2017 eclipse that showed that 76% of animals behaved unusually during totality. In one zoo enclosure, the chimpanzees, they climbed up to the top of that exhibit and they faced the sun. Essentially, they intuitively knew that the sun was still there, but they're intelligent enough to know that there was something that was blocking it, and in that case, it was the moon's shadow. So they climbed up to face the sun. Other studies have shown that giraffes exhibit anxiety, and they sway their bodies back and forth in ways that would not normally be demonstrated. And the eclipse will also impact wild animals, including nocturnal animals like frogs and crickets that start chirping during totality, and bats and owls. Those are creatures that come alive at nighttime. They may become more active during those 3 to 4 minutes of totality, due to the perception of night, because a lot of those wild animals associate darkness with nighttime. Additionally, diurnal animals, or animals that become a little more active in the evening time, like deer and squirrels, they become much more active during the eclipse. Squirrels are known to run around even more vigorously and more wildly than they normally do, which is saying something, isn't it? And then squirrels, interestingly, they actually continue to move around and run around well after the eclipse is done. So several hours beyond totality, those squirrels could still behave erratically. Now, as that April 8th total solar eclipse draws closer, we're going to have the very latest information right here on WTOL.com and on WTOL 11 Plus. And in my Climate Friday newsletter, I'm going to be breaking down the latest eclipse-related information each and every week. Subscribe for the latest. We'll see you next time.